I'm now joined by Ben Tube, a lawyer who served as a co-lead counsel for Johnny Depp in the Amber Heard case, and a former defence attorney who represented Suge Knight, Matthew Fletcher. And interestingly, gentlemen, I think you both completely disagree here. Matthew, let me start with you. You think this is a case of Diddy being railroaded and that the case is almost borderline farcical. Why do you say that?
I can tell you why it's farcical to me, is this idea of this mythical creature that can take ketamine and MDA and booze and then have sex for dozens of days on end and hours. That, from a pharmacological standpoint, that's not possible. This idea that Cassie waits 10, 12 years to file a lawsuit and writes a book and then doesn't turn it over to a general publishing group, but sends it to Jay-Z's lawyer and says, by the way, we're going to put this out unless you pay us millions of dollars, bespeaks the real motives behind this. And let me just say this. Puff is not a good person. He's a bad woman beater and he's a coward. I know the guy. Everybody I know agrees with that. But this is not a case about domestic violence. And you can talk about trauma bonding and any other psychological terms you want to lay on there. But the idea that Cassie had her own apartment, had her own money, had her own extra boyfriends or anything else does not speak to me as a traditional victim that we would see in a case of spousal abuse where this is ongoing. And I'll tell you this, when the prosecution told everyone that P. Diddy urinated in her mouth, that was shocking. When Daniel Phillip comes on and says, no, actually the person who urinated told me to urinate in her mouth was Cassie. And not only did she tell me that, she gave a tutorial and said, you want to do it slowly to make it last longer. At that point in time, the old adage is you can't win a trial with the first witness, but you can sure lose a trial. That lost me. Because what you're talking about now is an allegation that this, and I'm going to use its Mandingo stereotype of this crazed black man who's being prosecuted by 5 white women who are saying this man's sexual needs are insatiable and they can have sex for hours and hours and never rest and always ejaculate. That's not true from a pharmacological standpoint. That is absurd. If this was in the 60s or 70s in Mississippi, I think people would be irate. I don't like Sean Combs. That video speaks for itself. The question is, why wasn't he prosecuted for that? The question is, why wasn't he prosecuted for all of these crimes that have allegedly occurred, but we save it all up and we bring it in this case? And to Mr. Busby's point, this idea that the federal government does no wrong in prosecuting people, you know, it's kind of ironic that a Comey is on this case and a Comey also, you know, and he doesn't need my advice, but they told us that President Trump was a spy for Russia too, and that was complete BS, and we know that was. And so this idea and concept that the government does no wrong, federal government does no wrong in bringing cases, I don't think it's true. This is not a strong case. This is the case that if they prosecute it or defend it correctly, and you point out the idea that Cassie says Combs raped her and then she went back to his house sometime later and were having sex, and then her husband FaceTimed her, and she can't remember if she was actually had that man's genitals in her while she was FaceTiming her husband. That's not believable. It's not believable to me. No one would believe that. And it's just part of a long line of, as Busby says, these are bricks. A brick is not a wall, but a brick hits you in the head. A brick still hits you in the head. And like when Cassie says, Combs and his bodyguard went to shoot and kill Suge Knight. That's absurd. Combs is terrified of Suge Knight, terrified, has been terrified of him for decades, going back to a shooting that happened in Atlanta. Combs is not a tough guy. He's not going to jump in a car and go kill Suge Knight in Los Angeles. That's almost laughable. But there's multiple aspects of this case that when you look at factually and practically, it really brings to question, why are we here prosecuting, what was the old adage, sex, drugs, and rock and roll? I'm not saying it's right, but I'm not silly enough to think that there aren't many people who've engaged in sex with rock and roll stars or movie stars and use sex and use drugs. those are never prosecuted.
Okay.
And Cassie says, I paid.
Yeah, no, listen, I just wanted to bring in, Ben has been listening to all that because it was fascinating. I've got to say, the way you talked through all that. Ben, you don't agree. You think Diddy's going down. Why are you certain of that?
Well, I think my colleague makes some excellent points, and obviously this is going to be a very long trial, so there's much to still unfold. I think the purpose of opening with Cassie, of course, is the video, and the video certainly prepares the jury to conclude that he is capable of committing the crimes for which he's ultimately charged. The problem I had with the cross-examination of Cassie Ventura is this isn't a he said, she said case. There are going to be 3 other women and maybe even another male alleged victim who are going to tell a similar story. One of the second witness has already corroborated another alleged beating of Cassie Ventura. So that's the problem. And I think the government will have, it's not that the government can do no wrong. Obviously, we have seen it do wrong in some cases. But I think the point is that the government would not have brought this indictment if it did not have evidence.
Right. I mean, the track record of the federal government in cases like this is almost, it's inevitable that he goes down. It's like 99% hit rate, right? But they do occasionally get it wrong. But most of the time, if the feds bring a case like this, they win. I mean, isn't that the likelihood here, just on stats alone?
100%. I mean, their prosecution conviction rate of the federal government is in 99 percentiles, greater than the odds of being convicted if you're in Russia. Doesn't change the facts that in each case that sometimes you get defense attorneys who know what they're doing and know how to fight it and understand it and take them on. And in this case, what the prosecution is doing is saying that's a bad, mean, violent guy. Look at all of the bad things he does. And they're playing to the stereotype, and they're doing it covertly, but it's fairly obvious to those of us of a certain persuasion that you're arguing that this is a sex-crazed black man who has to get his craven desires administered to on a daily basis. So they set up an entire record company for the purposes of being able to entice Cassie Ventura into having sex. That's baloney, but that's what they're doing. And they can bring on multiple people they've had sex with. And all they're proving is, you know what, there's a secret. There's sex workers in the world, and there's people who frequent sex workers, but that doesn't really go to the issue. This is a RICO prosecution that was ideally brought to take down the mafia. Sean Diddy Combs is a guy who's a woman beater, and they should have prosecuted him for it, and there's no question about it. But you're telling me with a straight face this is a human slave tract, a white slave act case? There's no one who was brought here against their will. Cassie had every choice she wanted to make. They talk about Kid Cudi. Go be with him. Talk about Michael B. Jordan. You know, the reality is this was an incredibly attractive woman, and she was in great demand and had many opportunities to have people. She chose that lifestyle, and I'm not in any way.
Well, as we're talking, actually, Matthew, I want to bring Ben back here because Dawn Richard, the Danity Kane singer, has been on the stand today and recorded an incident in 2009 where she witnessed Diddy hit Ventura with a skillet and then allegedly threatened both Richard and Ventura. Richard testified, he said you could go missing, that we could die. I was shocked but also scared. She said she saw Combs carrying a handgun. She said Combs' bodyguards had guns too, keeping them on their lower back. I mean, to Matthew's point, Ben, I mean, he's obviously a very bad guy. He's obviously a woman beater. We've seen that with the video. He likes guns. He likes to threaten people, all of these things. But in terms of what the feds have actually gone after him for, racketeering, sex trafficking, and so on, Matthew makes a good point. This was set up for the mafia. This was the kind of stuff that when Rudy Giuliani tried to go after the mob, this is how they did it. And some people do think that they've just overreached in what they're going for him for on this. And for that reason alone, a jury might be persuaded to acquit.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Matthew and you both make excellent points, and that may be what ultimately happens. But we're at the beginning of a very long trial. And one of the things, as Matthew knows, is if you're a prosecution or if you're just putting on any kind of case, you want to keep the jury interested. So there'll be sensational testimony, as we've begun with sensational testimony that prepares the jury for the idea that maybe this isn't a good guy. And there's going to be some technical testimony going through the elements of the crimes for which he is charged. Now, if that's not there, if they don't have the receipts, there could be an acquittal and there could be an overreaching. But I think the prosecution is still very early on in its case. So I think we have to wait and see.
And Ben, do you see
There's
any
something very interesting.
Sorry, just one sec, Matthew. I'll go back to you. But Ben, just to bring in, when you were on the Johnny Depp v. Amber Heard case, do you see any parallels here? In particular, perhaps how a jury might be moved by what they hear?
Well, I think these are very different cases. That was Mr. Depp's case, civil case for defamation. So I don't see the parallel so much here.
But in terms of how a jury can be not manipulated, but perhaps led down certain thought processes, do you I mean, star power cannot be ignored, I think, in these cases.
No, I think that's right. And that's why I think you have to, in other words, if you're representing Diddy, you're going to have to counter that. And you're going to have to, I think he's going to have to testify as a practical matter. Criminal defendants usually don't. But I think with the video and the other testimony, I think he's going to have to come out and counter the narrative and be penitent for that, even if that's not what he's being tried for. I think he needs to put that before the jury.
Yeah, and Matthew, finally, to you on that point, would you, if you were advising Diddy, would you tell him to testify?
Diddy's horrible in cross-examination. When he was working with Johnny Cochran back in his original case of shooting, he comes off horrendously. And one quick point I want to make, if I may. This issue of consent and coercion, and the judge made a very big ruling last week when he agreed that they are going to show the videos, or some of the videos. And I've been told that Cassie is either a tremendous actress or she's actually having climaxes or orgasms. It's the when Harry met Sally argument. If that woman literally is on video having sex freely, and if what I've been told is true, that makes a real big issue as to whether or not this was coerced. It's a bad situation in retrospect, and she may be a wonderful witness today. And similar to Amber Heard, from what I've been told, she turns to the jury and speaks to them, which jurors hate. And prosecutors and lawyers always make the mistake of, now turn to the jury and talk to them. It's not natural. And so I see the similarities in that context. But this whole idea and concept that we're going to go back and Monday morning quarterback a person's sex scenes is open. Certainly leaves open the question that she enjoyed certain portions of it, and then that really goes to the heart of the case. If part was consensual, they have to go down on it. But my understanding, there's no way, to answer the point, that Diddy's testifying. And the more they play that video, it kind of works in the favor of the defense because the jurors get desensitized to it. It's horrendous. It's bad. In Suge Knight's case, we played the video over and over of the young man being ran over by the car, because after a while, it's just making sausage. It's shocking when you first see it, but when you work there, it's not that bad. But, you know, unless something changes drastically, my understanding is, and Diddy would come off horribly, in my opinion.
Fascinating. I've got to leave it there. Matthew, Ben, both, thank you very much indeed. We've got a long way to run with this, so I hope to get you both back on again. Thank you very much.